let me introduce you to Soul Lure, the cozy spectral fishing game where you catch fish by sending out your spirit, possessing them, and bringing them back into your raft. I've been going back and forth for a little while on how I want to do devlogs for showing how Soul Lure is made, and I've decided to focus more on specific elements that I'd like to show off. But since this is the first one, let's give some background into where this is all coming from. So I came up with the idea for Soul Lure as a challenge. I wanted to initially make it within 5 weeks, which was a bit harder than I thought it would be. But from that concept of making a game within 5 weeks, I spawned this quick mechanic, sending out your ghost to possess a fish and bringing it back to the raft. And I thought it would be a more cozy, chill vibe for a game that I haven't seen before. So why cozy? Most of the games that I play with my friends are really competitive games, like StarCraft 2 or Overwatch, but the games that I like playing with my wife are a lot more laid back. We'll sit on the couch and enjoy Stardew Valley together, or play It Takes Two, or if we're feeling particularly brave in our marriage, Overcooked. I like the idea of having a game that I can relax to with my wife, something that she would like to play alongside me. So now that I had this idea in mind, I went to the drawing board and started sketching out some ideas for a main character, which is where I fell on this nice little simple little boy in a raincoat on a raft. Disclaimer, I'm not an artist, and this is my first time trying to do art in anything other than pixel art. At least for a first draft, I was pretty happy with how the main character ended up. Using that same art style, I crafted up the main scene of the raft, a little lamp on it with a small little bell for summoning the NPC. And with all of those pieces in place, I was off to the races. Now, of course, there's a bunch of different categories that I could break this out into and that I could touch on for this devlog, but to keep things a little bit more focused, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the fish specifically. Some of the key aspects around the fish that I needed to get in place are I needed fish to spawn into the map randomly. I needed them to not spawn in specific areas. I needed a way to switch control over to the fish when the player possesses it, and I needed some way to keep track of how fish were caught. So I'm going to go over how I implemented those items in this devlog, starting with So when it came down to actually spawning the fish randomly, one of my earliest shorts, when I was showing off some of the prototypes for the game, someone came up with the idea of having a slowly expanding level the more you level up or more fish you catch, which I really liked. So inside of Godot, I started implementing a general area 2D around the raft where the user plays on. And this area is the playable area. So anything inside of this zone, good to go. And I like this methodology because that means that I can set breakpoints along the way where once the user buys an upgrade, that area can scale out, making the playable area really dynamic so that I can expand it as needed. Now, in that same sense, there are some areas inside of this big zone where I don't want fish to spawn, such as the raft or inside of the rocks. So in order to do this, I included a parent node inside of the level tree called exclusion zones, which will house a bunch of area 2Ds that essentially block anything from spawning inside of them. So anytime I add a node to the scene, if I don't want something to randomly show up inside of that zone, I just pop that on top of it and we're good to go. This was kind of a good sanity check for me because I didn't want to have to deal with cleanup and making sure that things weren't popping up where they weren't supposed to. So I liked this approach. Code-wise, I don't know if it's the best because I really just try until I find a spot that I can spawn in. But testing it out, it seems to work just fine. So I'm going to go forward with it. Of course, when I first played this out, I didn't cap the amount of fish that could spawn into the game, which left me with this lovely result. But this was an easy fix. I just capped the number of this type of fish that would be allowed inside of this level. So with that max counter in place, limiting the number of fish that were allowed in the scene, I was pretty confident and happy with how the spawning of the fish were taking place. Now let's take a look at... Before even coding the movement of the fish, I knew that there was going to be two states, non-possessed and possessed. I didn't want fish to just be stagnant sitting in the water when they aren't controlled by the player, so I needed them to have some sort of idle movement when they're just chilling in the water by themselves. And in order for me to control this, I set the jitter amount, the speed of the fish, and the is controlled flag. I made these variables to basically act like a hat for a fish so that I can put any number of fish inside of my game and put a different hat on each of them, just so I can control how they move around in the water at will. Jitter is essentially how often the idle movement timer resets. When a fish is not controlled by the player, a timer gets triggered for a random amount of time based on the jitter that'll allow it to move in a random direction. The higher the jitter amount, the faster it will move randomly in the water. And then speed is speed, how fast it moves. And then finally, the is controlled flag is just a way for me to keep track of, is the player controlling the fish or is it just being idle in the water? With the is controlled flag, I was able to leverage the same type of code that I used for my player character and the ghost character for movement. I'll go into the ghost and the player in a separate devlog, but needless to say, the movement for all of these bodies are essentially the same code. But now that I had that code in place, when the ghost hovered over the fish and swapped control, movement was able to transfer to the fish, and I was able to move it around. Now for one of the final pieces of working with the fish. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to happen when trying to get back to the raft. I want there to be some type of flopping or resistance when getting back to the raft. I wasn't able to get that done up to this point, but what I was able to get done is adding some obstacles for the user before they make it to the raft itself. So for example, rocks. I wanted it so that if a user runs into a rock when controlling the fish, control would transfer back over to the main character. I thought that this would be a lot more straightforward, but wow, I ran into a lot of issues with this. Some of which include when the fish would hit a rock, the fish would not clear from the tree. So when the player moved around, the fish was still active, as if there was still some type of telepathic connection to that fish against the rock. Also, when this happened, for some reason, when the fish touched a rock, the player decided to go into a deep meditative state. I'm not sure why. Eventually, I did add a signal to free the fish node from the tree when it did hit something, but I noticed that the glow wasn't fading away, so it was just blipping out of existence, which didn't really look good to me. But I was able to get around that by adding the glow energy level to the animation player that I had on the despawn animation for the fish. Once I was able to resolve those issues, once the player had control of a fish and it would run into a rock, control would switch back to the player smoothly. That fish would disappear and the user can try again. Finally, I needed a way to score or keep track of how many fish a user caught. And this, thankfully, was a lot more straightforward. All I did for this was to just add an area 2D inside of the raft, and whenever a fish that is controlled by the player enters a raft, it would emit a signal that would increase a global counter. I don't have the UI for this right now. I just logged it to the console to make sure that it was working. At least the functionality is there. I can make it pretty later. But there we have it. At least a lot of the core functionalities for the fish. There is still a lot of polish that I need to do for this, such as the actual possession of the fish is going to look like, what challenges are going to happen there, as well as how the fish reacts inside of the water to the user, rather than just being able to easily control it back to the raft. I want there to be a little bit more resistance. So there's still things to improve on, but I'm having a lot of fun building it out. And let me know what you think about what I have so far with Soul Lure. Let me know about things that you want to see in these updates or things that you want to see in the game. I'd be happy to try to implement as many things as I can. Thank you so much everyone for watching. And if you're at all interested in what my thoughts are on game dev roadmaps in general and what my personal roadmap is, go ahead and check out this video here. All right, that's it. See ya.